ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة يخافون يوما تتقلب فيه القلوب والأبصار ليجزيهم الله أحسن ما عملوا ويزيدهم من فضله والله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Everyone, once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I have a heavy task before me today. The ayat that we're going to cover after the opening ayah of the parable of Nur, from ayah number 36 onwards, have some very profound lessons for us. So I pray that, first of all, Allah gives me clarity in speech and thought, that I'm able to communicate some of these profound lessons to you. And I also pray that these lessons are able to make their way into our hearts as well, and our communities as well, each one of us individually. We saw that in the opening parable, Allah Azza wa Jal made reference to our hearts as a lamp. And we went through all of the pieces of that parable bit by bit and figured out what we might be able to learn from it. This next ayah opens with a clause, fi buyutin. And grammatically it's kind of tough to make sense of fi buyut because it's a jar majroor, Arabic students know. It has to be connected to something. It doesn't sit independently. It literally means in homes, in certain homes. That would be a good translation, in certain homes. But what is this in certain homes a part of, right? Because it's starting with this kind of clause. How is it connected? And most scholars are of the position that this is actually going back to the word mishkat. Mishkat meaning the lamp, in which there is a lamp in certain homes. So it's going all the way back. مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِيهَا مِصْبَاحٌ, right? But instead, مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِي بُيُوتٍ. So you're going back to مَثَلُ نُورِهِ, and it's as if this ayah is opening with an understood مَثَلُ نُورِهِ again. مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِي بُيُوتٍ. So we saw this niche, and we saw the lamp and everything that the lamp is about. But now, instead of focusing on the lamp, Allah is going to focus on the home in which the lamp exists. So one parable was about the camera zooming in on the niche and the lamp and everything about that. And now he's stepping back and saying, by the way, this example of Allah's light isn't just limited to the lamp, it also extends to the homes. Fi buyutin. Now, before going any further, just so you have an idea, the majority of our tradition argues that these homes that Allah is referring to are the masajid. That's the general opinion, that Allah is referring to the houses of Allah, the masajid. There are others who say this is all the homes of all the believers. And inshallah we'll see some other positions too, like Ibn Ashur makes a very interesting case in this case. But the reason we have these opinions, and not one conclusive opinion, is because Allah Himself did not make it specific. He said, fi buyutin, in certain homes, leaving it to the imagination, which homes are you referring to? But let's now go inside of these homes, and by the way, it's so beautiful that Allah could have said fi diyar, also homes, and fi buyut, also homes. But the word diyar comes from the verb dara yaduru, which means to circle. A diyar, a home is called a dar when you go in the house, out of the house, in the house, out of the house, and people are going between rooms and there's activity in the house. That's why there's dawa'ir in the dar. That's why it's called a dar. The home is called a bayt from the verb bata yabitu, and that means to spend the night. Bata yabitu is the Arabic verb for spending the night, or bayatan, to spend the night, to tarry the night. And so it's so appropriate that the word buyut is used because the example was that of a niche and a lamp, and the lamp only gets lit up at nighttime. So the imagery has already been set, and a perfect phrasing to compound the imagery, fi buyutin. You could almost think of it as in homes in the dark of the night, in homes in the middle of the night. And in fact, there's even a story in the Quran that this it starts ringing a bell when you hear this description. And that's the story of Zakaria alayhi salam. إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ نِدَاءً خَفِيًّا. He's in his mihrab, it's the middle of the night, he's just making dua to Allah all by himself, right? And it is in Allah's house. So there's actually almost like a case study of these buyut where the dhikr of Allah is happening in the story of Zakaria alayhi salam, which of course leads us to, Yahya, which connects directly to Maryam and Isa alayhi salam, right? The Christian legacy. And we already said yesterday that the reference to Zaytun is a very subtle way of reminding us of Watini was Zaytun. And Zaytun is a direct reference to the Mount of Olives, which again goes back to Jesus in some way. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. We're going to explore that further today, inshallah. In any case, Allah says, فِي بُيُوتٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ أَن تُرْفَعَ. In homes that Allah gave permission that they should be raised. They should be elevated. Allah allowed that certain homes should be raised. Now, the Arabs of the time when this surah was revealed, this is Medina, there are no skyscrapers, there are no tall churches, there are no multi-story buildings, right? So when Allah says these homes should be elevated and raised, well, what's He referring to? You could look at this in two ways. It could be that Allah is saying that Allah has given permission that in the future legacy of this ummah, right, the masajid shall get elevated. Like the masjid we're sitting in now, Allah has already given permission that this is now bound to happen, that these houses of Allah are going to be elevated. And gigantic masajid in places like that could never have imagined Islam, like Indonesia or Malaysia or even India, or places where paganism had its roots for millennia. And all of a sudden Islam comes. Or the Persian Empire that had its Zoroastrian roots and other pagan roots for thousands of years. And then you have Islam there. Or, one of my most amazing experiences in the last couple of years was going to Taiwan, where I visited the National Museum has a masjid in it, right? And more than that, I met a couple of ulama there, and we only spoke in Arabic. And I was kind of tafajat min al-fasaha. فسألتهم, I asked them, where did you study Arabic? He goes, yeah, here in Taiwan. I was like, what? Where? Taiwan, yeah, we have a madrasa, it's over 500 years old. They're teaching Sharia in Taiwan for 500 years. في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع. Right? I went to the museum and there were artifacts from the Ottoman Empire that had Arabic and Turkish inscription and Mandarin inscription, because they were doing cultural exchange between the Muslims of that region and the Turks. SubhanAllah. So Allah gave permission that these homes shall be raised. Another way you can see it, I would argue, is the spiritual meaning. The home may be made of mud. The home may be made in a poor neighborhood where nobody even seeks to go at nighttime. But because the dhikr of Allah is happening in it, because there's a mishkat in it, and it has that pure lamp in it, that in the sight of Allah, unlike the sight of people, that home has been raised. It's been elevated. And those that have the spiritual eye, like the angels, they can see that that home has been elevated. That's the actual skyscraper. So you could be, for example, in a major metropolis. You could be in like a New York City or a Sydney or somewhere else. And when you go to the downtown, or even here in Dallas, we have some kind of a downtown. But you go to a downtown and you see these tall structures and financial capitals and corporate headquarters, etc., expensive penthouses, some of the most prized real estate the more you go into the inner city, right? And then you go a little bit to the more, ghetto side or a little bit out of the country, and you keep going further out. What happens to the price of land, the price of homes, the infrastructure? You see a decline. More recently I was in Ohio I was just driving around, and some parts of Ohio I was driving, I could not believe I was in the United States of America. It looked like it was like a disaster zone. But it was in the middle of the Midwest of the United States. And there are places like that in Texas too, right? So imagine in the ancient world, you have the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Chinese empires, the Indian empires. You have these massive empires with their palaces and roadways and civilizations and all of that. And then you have the Arabs in the desert with their mud homes, with their lack of highways. Their fastest mode of transport, their most reliable mode of transportation is a camel, right? Their great reservoir is a well, Somebody who has a few trees, a few palm trees is like the billionaire in the area, right? He's got a couple of acres. Oh, he's got a couple of acres, right? Because in that small world, that was a big deal, right? And yet, even in that minuscule place, some people are remembering Allah and their homes have been elevated in the sight of Allah. An turfa'a, homes that Allah allowed that they should be raised. It could also be a reference, as I'll come to it at the end, or maybe in the middle, that this may be Allah's way of saying that Allah allowed for masajid to be built all over the world, like I was saying before, but even referring to what happened before. And hopefully I'm able to do a good job clearing that to you. وَيُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ. And so Allah allowed that His homes, in homes that Allah allowed to be raised, and that His name should be remembered in them. His name should be remembered in them. Allah's name should be remembered in them. It's a very interesting phrasing. Now the thing is, I'll take you right there even from now. The Arabs didn't really have homes in which Allah, like houses of worship. They had temples, pagan temples. This is definitely not talking about pagan temples, because in those homes or in those houses of worship, Allah is not mentioned. The clause here is يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ. His name is mentioned. Allah's name is mentioned, right? So it's not referring to pagan temples. But the Arabs did travel quite a bit outside of Mecca. And when they traveled, they also traveled towards the Levant. And when they traveled towards the Levant, they also saw olive trees. And they saw شَجَرَةٍ مُبَارَكَةٍ زَيْتُونَةٍ لَا شَرْقِيَّةٍ وَلَا غَرْبِيَّةٍ. And as they traveled towards the Levant, they also ran into many Christian monasteries. And in those Christian monasteries, one of their key features was they have these niches, and they have these lanterns, and they have these night vigils where they do their spiritual practices. So this sounds like it's borrowing imagery from Christian monasteries, because the niche structure and this kind of thing in the masajid, that's a much later development. But this is already happening. This is also being made reference to already. Why would Allah do that, subhanahu wa ta'ala? He's done something incredible. The law that I was referring to in Surah An-Nur diverges from Jewish law, right? So this is the final Sharia. And the spirituality in the middle of Surah An-Nur diverges from Christian spirituality. This is the divergence from Christian spirituality. When the world thought of spirituality in that era, in that climate, they weren't thinking about Judaism, they were thinking about Christianity. And the Christians had their monasteries, had their candle lights, had their lamps lit in the middle of the night, and people forsaking, all things to just, do worship, etc. The monks dedicated to the service of the church and all of it. Now listen to this description. Homes that Allah allowed to be raised. You notice that in the Christian world, the Byzantine world, and even before them, the churches, lots and lots of money was put into the construction of churches. In fact, sometimes they were higher and bigger than even the palaces of the kings. And many of the kings, the Byzantines in particular, for example, would dedicate land and say, this is tax-exempt land, it's being given to the church. And the church would build a giant center there, a temple there, and then they would charge people, sometimes mandatory 10%, sometimes more, sometimes less, and they would keep acquiring more and more land and farm, and so the church started becoming this giant corporation, and it was charging people money. And then if you had to go get married, you have to pay a fee, then the priest will perform your wedding. And if you want to get your child baptized, then you have to pay a fee, and so it became it was a center for the religious services, but it also became a giant business enterprise. And because they were tax exempt, they kept on making money and making money and making money. But why would the king give them that? The king gave them that because he knows people love the church. People love religion. So when they come to the church and the priest says, God save the king, God bless the king, then this is politically good for me. So he's saving because he doesn't want civil unrest. Right? So he'll dedicate the land to the church. Now the church is also, by the way, is anything ever free? No, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So when the government is giving them free land, then they know they will never speak against the government. And if they will never speak against the government, the people that come to the church and listen to their sermons are never going to rise up against the government so long as they're good Christians. Because to be a good Christian is to be loyal to your king. So there's a kind of a business deal going on between the church and the government. Right? But the people don't necessarily know that. People go there to pray. People just go there to worship. Behind it is an entire corrupt, political, financial, social mechanism in play. And inside the church, there's also lots of politics. Who's going to be the head priest? Who's going to give the Sunday sermon? Who's going to provide the service? Who's going to read the hymns? Right? Because there's also hierarchy inside the church. There's the deacon, and there's the bishop, and there's all this stuff, and who's going to get chosen, which board is going to get elected as the permanent member, who's going to get removed, There's all this politics going on. But the poor guy that just walks into church to pray, he doesn't know any of that. Now I'm telling you all of this, but some of you are like, is he really talking about a church? Right? And that's by design. That's by design. Allah said some homes that are meant to be elevated. That Allah allowed that they should be elevated. Now, physically, some homes were allowed to be elevated, except Allah's name was not being mentioned in them.